Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, we ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon His messengers and prophets and those that follow in their blessed path. We want to welcome everyone here tonight. It's a special event, it's a special occasion, and I want to actually just start this off by saying personally, I had the blessing of going on a civil rights pilgrimage to Montgomery and Birmingham and Selma and different places from the civil rights movement. And there was a missing piece of it, which was obviously there was a clear omission of Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, and all of the civil rights museums that were down there. And it wasn't just noticed by the Muslims on the trip, it was noticed as well by the Christians that were there on that trip, that there was a clear omission of Malcolm and his presence when he came to Selma, and in general in the civil rights movement. And it's rare that you find people that were living testaments to that history, that at the same time can relate so much to what's happening right now in the present in the United States, having lived through those moments, and can also relate to the struggle of being a Muslim in America as well, and what that entails. And it's rare to find someone that has interacted with so many of those luminaries, like we have in our sister Khadijah, who's with us tonight. So inshallah, I'm going to hand it off first to Brother Thomas Muhammad. This was a joint program between Yaqeen and the National Black United Front, who put this all together, who brought everyone here together, alhamdulillah, who brought Sister Khadijah here. We're very blessed to have Gromer with us, and I'm looking forward to having you and hopefully having you to our mosque more often as well. And I'll ask Brother Thomas to take it over and to conduct the evening program. Assalamu alaikum.
Again, assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's a huge gap that's missing in terms of the struggle of our people, and I'm talking about particularly African American people in America, that is missing in our historical notes. Specifically, Brother Malcolm, who of course accepted Islam formally when he made Hajj in Mecca. He acknowledged that that was a truth faith for him. And he was always Malcolm. But the key thing is that he was a brother who was honest and straightforward. And so he spoke the truth on everything he dealt with, specifically electoral politics. And so he called it that peaceful revolution, if you will, that will help free people in America, particularly African Americans. And so, like a Sheikh Omar, when I visited Selma myself the first time, maybe about 20-some years ago, and I saw in this museum a picture of Malcolm in the voting rights history. It just blew me away. And so I became very active with that museum, and I now serve on the board of that museum in Selma, Alabama. So I go every year, specifically for meetings. But primarily, that's very important for the key thing that Muslims played a part in the history of voting rights as well as civil rights history in this country. So we will start the program because I know you all came to hear Sister Khadijah's story. It's a very powerful one. And so having said that, growing up in the movement, there's so many of us did, but being in Selma at that time was extremely dangerous. And so you're about to hear the story of a person who actually walked, lived this story for all of her life. And having said that, I'll turn the podium over to you guys.
So how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
Very good. Tell us about what are you doing, real quickly, what are you doing now, where are you living, what's life like for you?
That's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. I'm Khadijah Ghafur. I'm an African-American Muslim woman, mother of 1, grandmother of 8, raised a lot of children, and I'll be willing to be your family member also. That's the humanity in me, and I just wanted to address that I'm very honored that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have me here today, because I can feel the humanity in this room, and it's with humanity that we can move forward. That's one of the things that's missing in life, is that the love and the kindness that come from human being to human being. So I'm a grandmother living in South Carolina, currently working on my dissertation. I just submitted chapter 3 of my dissertation. My dissertation is on the rising violence on college campus against Muslim students. And some of you may not know, but that is a dilemma in our society, and very little attention is being given. So I plan to change that. So I'm in the background, and that's just the opportunity that Allah has given me, is just do what you can do. You don't need accolades, just do what's right. And so I want to bring the attention to what's happening, especially with the 3 students that was brutally murdered in North Carolina, point blank. And you can't rewrite that script. They were murdered because the way they dress, and because they love Allah. And you can't change that. So that's who I am now, working. I'm not used to this, Brother Tom. That's what I am involved in now, just being myself as a grandmother, trying to finish this doctorate in education.
All right, okay. Well, let's go back. Let's go back to 1965. You were 14 years old, and you were there at Brown Chapel Church in Selma when Malcolm X spoke, and you got to shake his hand. What were your impressions of him? Okay,
for historical reasons, can I just go back a little further?
Right.
Okay, in 1963, my mother wouldn't allow me to date or anything because of what she had, the trauma that she had.
And is this in Selma?
Endured. This is in Selma, Alabama. I was born and raised in Selma, Alabama. There's a lot of backstories about Selma that the public doesn't know, but because I was raised in Selma, I have the backstory. And in that backstory, my mom, I was raised by a single parent. My mom, like probably many other sisters, there was no Me Too movement, was just gang raped by a group of white Americans. And that tragedy against her affected her in raising 6 children by herself. And so that's the background of my story, being raised with a mother that was damaged and had to do what she could do to raise 6 children.
And when did you know
she
that happened?
She shared the story with her children when she was ready. And when she shared that, it was a shock, but it was able to clarify to us how she was, because there was no understanding of what she was going through when she was raising us. So I couldn't date because I had 5 brothers, and I was wondering, so because of what happened to her, I was like, you stay home. So I stayed home all the time, but the time that she allowed me to fly the coop was the movement.
Okay.
Dr. King is coming to town, do that. So Dr. King came to town in 1963. So I live in the George Washington Carver home. That's about 500 homes. Majority of the occupants of the George Washington Carver home are single parent mothers raising their children, majority of them. And I could go to my front porch and see everybody that enters into the historical Brown chapter church. And sometimes I would attend that church. So I would go, I can just sit on my porch. You could see any and everybody come. But the advantage was I could be there before everybody. I was 5 minutes away from Brown Chapel Church. So I heard Dr. King was coming in town, so I shot over. And I was sitting on the curb. And I was just sitting there waiting for everything to get started. A car drives up. And I'm just busy being me, waiting, because I'm a reader. I read all the time. I'm being reading, but I look up, and there's Dr. King. He's sitting in the car, and the driver is Ralph Abernathy. Andrew Young is in the back seat. C.T. Vivian, I remember this clearly, is in the seat. I don't know who the third person, there are 3 men in the back seat. I look up and I said, oh my Lord, there's Dr. King. So I go up to the window and I say, Dr. King, Dr. King. He rolls down the window. I can tell there was regret, but he rolled down the window. He rolled down the window. It was a slow roll. And I said, Dr. King, oh, I get to meet you. I was just yada, 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 yada. I was a reader, so I knew a lot about him. So I'm just chatting Dr. King up. And he is like, oh my Lord. And I said, Dr. King, after the men in the back are just laughing, and Abernathy is like, oh my God, this little girl, she won't go away. You could just see that in them. I was 13 years old. That was 1963. And I'm saying, there was a moment, I was like, wait a minute, stop talking to him. Dr. King, can I have something of yours? And he was like, I don't believe this child. I said, no, Dr. King, please, can I have something of yours? And Dr. King is looking at me. He said, I'm sorry, little girl, I don't have anything. And I said, I remember clearly, Dr. King, you're Dr. King. You have something. He said, no. So the men, the car is rocking because they're laughing so hard. Here's Dr. King, can't get rid of this child. And I'm like, I'm serious. I need something of Dr. King. And he is like, look, girl, I said, I know you have checked. I know you have something. I remember this conversation. And Dr. King is looking at me, and then I began to realize that I'm aggravating him because he's sweating. And I was like, and I don't know how much time passed, but I am saying, Dr. King, literally, I don't know if it came out of my mouth or not, but the spirit was, I'm not leaving until you give me something. Right. And so he was exhausted. They're laughing. I don't care about them laughing. I need something from Dr. King. And so Dr. King took out his handkerchief. He's wiping the sweat. I said, that's it, that's it. And he says, what? I say, your handkerchief. He said, no, little girl, it is dirty. I said, that's even better. And Dr. King gave me his handkerchief, you know. And when I became a Muslim, I reflected back on that. How could this poor child from a single mother exceptionally poor, our lights were barely on most of the time. How could this child, how could God Almighty put Dr. King in a conversation with this poor child? And that was in 1963. So we fast forward, February the 4th, I hear my hero is coming to town, Malcolm X.
And that was 65?
1965,
right? Yeah.
February the 4th. I remember dates.
Yeah.
I can't remember my grandkids' names all the time, but I remember what happened in the movement. So here's the caveat. I can get there early. The best seat in the house, called this man, everything I've read about him, I respected. So I got there early and I said, where's the best place to sit? The best spot in the house is on the right-hand side of the choir. I can't sing a lick, but I was gonna get that seat. So I sat there and just waited. He came, he did not disappoint. If you have not seen Malcolm X in person, to this day, I have never met anyone so handsome, so, I mean, however Allah had him to walk this earth, he was put here for a reason, and you felt that. When he spoke, I was so close to him, just like this. He was at this speaking, and I could see his eyes changing colors. I have never heard a person so brave, so extraordinary, articulate, so clear. He could identify the problems that was facing African Americans. And I think that's probably one of the things that has happened historically, is that we have not had people that could identify what was going on with us and how we can get out of it. Malcolm just wasn't taught. He gave ideas on how to resolve the issues. And I noted that as a young child. And I sit there, probably one of the happiest days of my life, just sitting here watching the hero speak. And I was like,
Do you remember what he talked about?
no.
No?
Yeah, I remember him arguing. If I go back and listen to the speech, it was there. I can tell you that, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I heard him talking about the chicken coming to roost. I heard him saying, I never heard anyone that was African American speak to the others like that. Right. Never. And so that was new in the South, you know, that was new. And he was speaking to the reporters, and the reporter was like, I didn't do it. You could see that look on their face, because they thought they were going to be attacked, because he was firing the group up. He was an incredible speaker. So after the speech, he went into the back. Of course, I'm the same girl that held up Dr. King. I got to meet him. So I shot to the back. When he was about to end that speech, I shot to the back, and I just waited. He came through the other side. So that, I was like, oh my goodness. But on cue, as a gift from God, he, as if he heard and felt me coming into the room. That's my story. He looked over and literally walked from where Brother Thomas is and came over towards this little girl that's a child of a single mother who just didn't know where her life was going to end. He came straight to me as if the Almighty said, go see her. He came straight over to me and he said, he said something, I'll be honest with you. It was something like, how are you? I was just, I don't believe you're about to touch me. And he put out his hand and he shook my hand. And when he shook my hand, the sad part about it, the only thing I can think of, why is his hand soft? He was such a gentle man. All that fire and brimstone, I thought his hand was going to be like a brick, but you could feel the kindness in his handshake. And it was, Then I really try not to wash that hand for a while, but that didn't work. Long answer.
Right. And Brother Thomas alluded to this. In the annals of the movement, what's been written, not so much about Malcolm X and voting rights, and you're from the South. Do you think he was committed to voting rights, to struggle of getting people, into the political process?
Absolutely. I mean, he talked about that, He said the ballot or the bullet, or that was one that he preached. I'm telling you, he gave answers. And he left this earth because he had answers. We know that. We know that. This man, he had made Hajj, and that's the pilgrimage for Muslim. That's a recharge. That is a spiritual recharge. He made Hajj, and then he came to us in Selma after that Hajj. So you saw a man coming back to deliver answers to humanity. Not to, when he left, he was looking for answers for black people. When he came back, he was bringing answers for humanity, because he had seen next to him a white brother that was praying. He had seen people from other countries standing in prayer with him.
Now, of course, February 21st, 1965, not too long after your encounter with him, he was assassinated.
17 days.
17 days.
Yeah.
So you didn't wash that hand, right, for a long time, and you were so overwhelmed by that moment. What was your state of mind after he was killed?
I cried. It was devastating, because I knew that, not that the earth had lost a man, but I knew that the world had lost answers, and that's why he was taken away from us.
Yeah. And before we go on to the next question, let me ask you this: you've had, in a span of a couple of years, you had two really distinctive moments with some of the icons of the liberation movement, King and Malcolm X. How do you compare the two? You said Malcolm X was your hero, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but how do you process all of them?
The best way to explain that is that I like fruit.
Okay.
I love everything about an orange, and I love everything about an apple. So I like fruit. And those two men were fruit. They were fruit. There was something I enjoyed. And that's how humanity should be, is that just because we're different, we're just, like if you're cooking soup, my mother used to boil spices so we wouldn't be, she had no food, so she'll boil spices. But in that pot, with all the different spices that made a soup, it takes different spices to make a good soup. And so that's all I saw. They were just part of a fruit bowl.
And being from Alabama, do you think the rivalry that we hear so much about, was that overblown?
It was overblown, because Malcolm, when he came to Selma, he had a consciousness. He had become Muslim. He had converted to Islam. So he had a different understanding of life and where man should go. So he added that humanity to the understanding of the black struggle. And that was a dangerous combination. That meant that people were going to be empowered with a sense of awareness and consciousness, and that's dangerous.
Yeah. March 1965, and you had an eventful 1965.
Okay, thank you for changing that.
Edmund Pettus Bridge. You participated in that march. 600 civil rights activists, and of course you guys were met, you beaten, gassed. So tell me what it's like before a march like that. What are you thinking? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you know that maybe you can get hurt out there? And you're still, what, only about 14 or 15? So what was that like, the whole experience?
At 13, there was an organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Canadian Committee. Okay. That brought into Selma people, historical figures that I witnessed as a child, going past my house, going to meetings with them. Because I was a student, I was part of that movement automatically. I was in high school at the time. So Stokely Carmichael, seeing him, seeing him whenever. They were all there. Willie Ricks. Yeah. He would go around Black Power, then his hands started going up. I saw the formation of the Black Power sign, the Black Power movement just developing before your eyes. Willie Ricks started that. There was James Bevel, but it was James Bevel who was part of SCLC that went to Dr. King with the idea of marching. They wanted to come to Selma, but the idea of marching from Selma to Montgomery. SNCC did not like the idea, but John Lewis was okay with it. But he was like, everybody in SNCC, to give you a visual, most of the guys, and they were young men, most of them were wearing overalls. John Lewis wore a overcoat. So he stood out differently, and that's the stuff because you working with them and seeing them almost every day.
Do you think he was a politician back then?
Yeah, he had that look, right. And he stood out from the rest of them. And then he spoke slow, and he spoke, like just as he speak now. He had that old feeling back then. He was an old soul. But everybody else, Stokely and Bernard Lafayette, who was it Bernard Lafayette? I think that was his name. But these figures were just coming to us. They would go up and down the brickyard and not thinking that they were going to be historical figures, but they were there. But James Bevel took the idea to Dr. King. Dr. King okayed it. SNCC did not come on board initially because they thought it was a dangerous idea, which not a bad idea. It was a good thought. And so, but John Lewis, may God be with him, this young man, I was 14, he was only 24 years old at the time in 1965. But he sounded like a thoroughbred 40-year-old man. He had that type of wisdom at 24. Matter of fact, a lot of those young people did. You could not understand that they were children. They were the young people. Can you imagine a 24-year-old man leading a march, willing to lead a march during the civil rights movement against the power structure in those days? He was extraordinary. So he led that march, him and Jose Williams. My mother gave us the okay, and we had to be on a pair of twos. My brother Clifford was my partner. So it was a decision. It was back in those days, it was just natural to be brave. It was just natural to do the right thing. It was just natural to fight for the rights of your parents to vote. It was not something that you feel obligated to do. It was just something natural. It was as if the history and the role that we had to play had to be done. There was no question in our mind. And I was a reader. I was a very religious child at that time. So we marched. And as we marched, you remember the LPs, as we were going, we were marching from Brown Chapter on that line. My minister, F.D. Reese, was there. I need to back up. I think he was there. And as we were marching, the store that we patronized almost every day was playing Bye Bye Blackbirds. We was like, what's that about? But they were like, it kept playing Bye Bye Blackbirds. And we was like, And they were just screaming. That it was like it's what you imagine how there were mobs around when people were about to get lynched. This is the backstory. There were people lined up to watch a lynching in front of the stores, just bye-bye Blackbirds.
So they came there that day hoping that...
Openly watching us, because we didn't know what we was headed to, because we have to go over the bridge.
Right.
And the bridge goes up and down. So we couldn't see anything over that bridge. So we had to walk over the bridge. Okay, so we're walking. Of course, when you get to that part where you can see what was happening, there were horses, state troopers. I have never seen that many state troopers in one place in my life, even to this day. It was, I didn't think Selma had that many state troopers, but we heard later on they brought people from other areas. But there were state troopers, there were horsemen. You can see they had cattle prods in their hand, they had billy clubs. And I look at my brother, and people behind it was like, let's get out of here.
Did you get hurt?
No, the first question is, did you want to go over there? The first question, and I look at my brother, we going. And so it was just same thing. If you're 13 years old, asking Dr. King for that handkerchief, follow the script, follow Allah's script. I went over, I said, let's go, brother. We went down, and he was like saying some other words, but it was okay. So we kept going. At one point, they asked us in the line, we could see that they stopped John Lewis. I can recognize John Lewis because of that trench coat. He had that trench coat on. And the part where we were in the line, they told us to kneel down and pray. Because we were singing, I ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. That was like the mantra. I ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. That was the movement. Like you had to pump yourself up to go against the establishment. So they say kneel down and pray. And I'm here to tell you all, without any hesitation, I can literally remember that point. I kneeled down, I closed my eyes, and I agreed that, okay, God, I'm giving my life to you. I'm giving my life up for the movement. Because there's no way we're going to get out of this. We didn't have any weapons. There was too many people with weapons that was blocking us from going anywhere going forward. So I sat down in that highway, and I literally, as a 14-year-old child, I made peace with God to die.
You thought that was it?
I knew it was it.
Yeah.
And then I heard an inner voice, open your eyes. And I have no idea to this day, and I can't explain it. I can explain it now as a Muslim, but at that time, I could not explain it. Before that voice said, open my eyes, I didn't smell any gas. I didn't smell
The tear gas and all
anything.
that.
I didn't hear the screaming. I didn't hear the horses galloping. I didn't hear anything. I was silenced in prayer. When I opened my eyes, I saw John Lewis being beaten. I literally saw through the tear gas. I mean, multiple men just beating him. I look over, and there was a woman that she was running, but she had tripped, and they was beating her. Then something say, look to the right, and then I looked to the right, and there was all these horses coming at me. But then I realized there's nobody else in this highway but me. I looked, literally, people behind me were gone, and only people I saw was John Lewis. I was like, how long was you praying? So I, to this day, do not understand how I ran those horses. I outran those horses because they was galloping towards me, and you could see that it was going to be crazy, but they didn't catch me.
Yeah, and you got through it, and
Obviously.
yeah, and at that moment, that the courage, and we hear so much about the leaders, right? Not so much about the other 500 or 600 on that bridge. Why weren't you able to? Were you able to tell that story before now to anybody?
Mhm.
Okay.
But the other part of it is nobody asked.
See,
We don't get, you hear about the leaders,
right.
stories, but the foot soldiers, and then
And just as courageous foot soldiers, right? Yeah,
with nothing to gain.
right. Now, let's move on to Dr. King and Turnaround Tuesday, right? The Turnaround Tuesday March. You were there for that.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
2 days later, that day, March 7th, is historically called Bloody Sunday because there were so many people beaten that day. And to this day, that's why I wear glasses, because the tear gas was so thick, it just burned it was just burning our eyes. You couldn't hardly see. And on Bloody Sunday, after Dr. King, we gave to the civil rights movement, young kids gave to the civil rights movement the publicity that it needed to go forth, because a lot of people really wasn't feeling like supporting the civil rights movement because too many people, it was just too much, too political. But the day that picture went around the world, here men of authority beating citizens of the United States. Didn't matter what color they were, but if you was in that line, you needed to be beat. And they beat us, and it was inhumane. It was probably the most senseless. It was a picture worth a million words. And that gave energy to the entire movement. So Dr. King, 2 days later, came to Selma and said, we're going to march again. It's called
Turnaround.
So, of course, I was like, I didn't die the first time, I'm going back out. So I went out, but this time I think we slept in the street just getting prepared for this meeting because Dr. King was going to lead us. And so we marched across the bridge again, and we was ready to, just go the first 10 miles going to Montgomery. But for whatever reason, Dr. King, like they parted the waves. They was like, go on. But it was one of those things like, if y'all letting us go through, something is going to happen.
Did you feel like he kind of missed all the action a couple of days early?
I don't know. I can't say what was going on in Dr. King's mind, but the most disappointing thing that I ever felt is when he turned around. Yeah. Because as far as I was concerned, I was already dead, the 2 days earlier. So let's go. And he turned around. So I was there, turned around. And then so he said that they just wanted to plan more.
Yeah. Now, also in '65, the Selma to Montgomery. It's back. Okay. The Selma to Montgomery march. You walked 50 miles.
No,
right? Was it?
I did the first 10, and I did the last. I did the first leg and the last leg.
Yeah.
By this time, you can imagine I haven't been to school.
Right.
So I had to show up in classes. I was a smart student, so I would just go in and take the test and get back out. Matter of fact, I didn't have to get permission. The teachers and the principal at that time, they would send, get out, go back and march. Yeah. Go back, take the test and go back and march. Take the test, go back to march. What happened in Selma, I have not seen that type of unity ever again in 55 years.
Yeah. Being so young, what did you think you were marching for and rallying against and trying to accomplish? What personally were you trying to accomplish?
Just what everybody else was saying. My mother could not vote. When I grow up, I would not be able to vote. There was something about Selma as a vortex of awareness. People knew. You just knew about your civil rights. And one of the things that was because that you understood clearly is that what Malcolm taught us was our human rights. There was a void in the human rights. Yeah. So as a child, I was quite aware of that. Remember that was back in the days where women were wearing their hair natural. There was a sense of awareness and consciousness.
Okay. Now tell us about this. This is tragic. While you were in Montgomery, your 19-year-old brother, Leroy, right, mm-hmm. was in the car when civil rights activist Viola Lewis, yes, mm-hmm. was killed, and I believe she was the only white woman killed in that era, in that civil rights movement. Yeah. What were your thoughts about that, and what did your brother tell you about it?
Initially, when we was returning back to Selma, of course we wasn't going to walk the 50 miles back.
You had already gotten your steps in, right?
The movement had made arrangement for a lot of the marchers to be carted back by private cars or get on a train. There was a freight train that you had to crowd up in like cargo. Right. So they rented those cargo whatever they call car. They rented those
the cars.
What they call? Yeah, they rented those, and we all crowded up in there, and I came back like that. So somebody came up to the train and said my brother was killed, and I was like, no, my brother's not dead. Because, you can just feel it. Right. No, your brother was in a car, and he was escorting Mrs. Luzo back, and Miss Luzo had responded. Dr. King called on the world after the Bloody Sunday for everybody to come to Selma to assist. and she left her 5 children at home. And
She
her
was
husband
from
gave her
Michigan.
Michigan,
Yes.
Detroit, Michigan. And she left her 5 children at home, and her husband allowed her to drive the family car down. And so she was helping bring people back and forth. But every woman by herself had to have a male escort. And my brother was a teenager at the time, so she had 5 children. So, but that history has it that they would distort that. And he told me as they were driving to pick up another load of margers that was on the road. As they was driving to make another pickup, a car passed them by, and there were 5 men in the car. And he looked over, and he saw them, but they passed them by. Then they turned around, and unbeknownst to the other 4 passengers in the car, that there was an undercover agent. There was an FBI undercover agent in the car. So they came back, and they had decided to kill them both. And so they literally just shot repeatedly in the car, blowing part of Mrs. Lewis's head off. And there was so much blood that my brother fell forward. There was so much blood from her, it spilled over on him. Now the story goes, did he fake being dead, or did he faint? So that's neither here, I don't even know. But he fell forward, and when they got out the car to check, because there was other cars passing by, when they got out to check, they just thought they were both dead. So he waited a little while, got out the car, and flagged some people down. Of course, that had an incredible toll on his life.
Yeah.
You know, he could never live in Selma again. We all had a job. We after school, between 11 and 13. He was the cook in this restaurant. I was a dishwasher. Another brother was a dishwasher. We had to help our mother pay the bill, and another brother was the busboy. We were child laborers. It was like slavery. We worked, but we worked to eat, and we got paid very little. And he lost that job. He couldn't get any job. Literally, our family was tarred and feathered out of Alabama. My mother lost her job. There was no way to survive. My oldest brother was, I don't know when he came back from Korea. My oldest brother was in the, no, that was, he served in Korea, but that's a whole nother story. But he, when we came back from that moment, after the march from Selma to Montgomery, everybody lost their job. There was no way to survive in Selma.
Yeah. Well, you eventually made your way north with Dr. King to Cicero, Illinois. And for those of you who don't know about Cicero, it's right outside of Chicago. Al Capone used to set up shop there. Mob town, but one of the most racist cities, little cities in the north. Of course, King was there to help desegregate, affordable housing, trying to do all of that. And you were there. What was that like? Because he was attacked, right? Motorcade, the car he was riding in, they threw things at him. And I'm from Chicago, so this is sort of like a legendary story for us. So What was that like? So,
That was in 1966.
Yeah,
I think it
66.
was. My Leroy could not live in Alabama anymore. He was on the run because, why? Because he remembered the faces of those men that was in that car.
Right.
And so he had to run for his life. So Dr. King, they brought him into SCLC and they sent him to Chicago. During the time that Dr. King asked many people to come, the people that live in the project, those 500 houses, had to house people from around the world. So in our house was a professor. He was a physicist. He was a Jewish man that had been a victim of the Holocaust, and a grenade had blown up, and he had lost his. He was deaf and mute, but he was brilliant. I didn't know how to do math, but this man would just sit with me and would just write notes, and he would teach me math when I did go to school. So he, when all of this was over, him and his family invited me to Evanston, Illinois, because he was a professor at Northwestern University. So I went to Evanston, and Leroy was in Chicago. I would take the L train to go see him. And when I went over to see him, Dr. King was coming to town. And I was like, hey, let's keep going.
Did you have your handkerchief working?
No, I lost it on the bus. We went to the mass meetings in Chicago, and they asked everybody to get into cars. I was about a couple cars from Dr. King. I could literally see them in their car, and there were people lined up. They had rocks and eggs, and they just egg and rock us. There was no fear. They could care less. You could feel the hate, and it was a different type of hate from down the south. It was the unexpected hate.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. It's a Southern woman, a Southern girl. I'm sorry. Right.
For me as a child, I hadn't calculated that white people in the North hated you. I just knew the white people in the South hated us. It just didn't make any sense to me.
And you probably had heard stories about going to Chicago or going to North. You know, of course, they had the Great Migration. You probably thinking this is going to be really cool.
Was not expecting the rock.
Right.
Was not expecting the egg on me.
Yeah, he actually got hit in the head, Dr. King, in Gage Park in Chicago.
Wow.
I think that shook him up too.
Yeah.
I mean, he may have said, I'm paraphrasing, that he didn't feel the most hate he ever felt was in Chicago, and that was in the North.
But it's the truth, because it was in Selma, the officers, the law enforcement beat you up. In Chicago, the regular citizen was beating you up.
Yeah.
It was like, and just being in the movement, you can see the dynamics and the paradigms and the contradictions. As a child, I was able to see that it's like, here, a regular citizen and the cops were just, we ain't touching this. They allowed them to beat us. And it was just the opposite. The citizen was allowing the enforcement to beat us down south. But for an African American child, you don't win either way. Everybody wanted you to beat you up. And nothing really has changed that much now.
Yeah. Just a couple of more questions. Where, after all of that, where did the movement take you? You were so young then.
The movement took
Because
me,
you had so much tragedy then later, young
Yeah.
King assassinated and so many others' lives were taken. What happened to you after?
I'm going to answer that, but I just want to tell you that in it probably was the ending of 65, they arrested us and we was put in a cell, 29 girls. We were put in a cell.
Where were you?
In Selma, Alabama.
Okay.
They arrested us. This is after Bloody Sunday. You think nothing can get more inhumane. This is after Turning Around Tuesday. This is after my brother almost get killed. They arrest us, 29 girls, and hold us in a holding tank like 1/4 the size of this. It was the place that they arrested us, that was holding us, they was for a cell built for 2 people. They had 29 of us was in there, and they served us black-eyed peas with saltpeter. They literally was trying to damage. It was just salty black-eyed peas and cornbread with no eggs, no milk, just mush, cornbread and black. That's all we had to eat. So the prisoners, with all their nasty fingernails and everything, would just go steal cheese and just pass it through us through the cell. It was just an insane thing to do to children. But they held us in that cell. But the good part about all of that, we finally got out. I forgot how long we was in that cell together. They graced us with a trip to the people in Massachusetts. Took a busload of kids out of Selma and took us to their home. And a kid with this single mother, nothing going on, go to the World Fair. They granted us that. Mm-hmm. So back to how did all this affect me? Did it affect me this way? It was a natural gift. It was a natural gift to fall in the hands of Allah. When I found out about Islam, it was just natural. All that pain, all that suffering, that when I heard about Islam, it was just an easy choice. How I felt when I gave up my life at 14 years old, when I took Shahada, there was no different. Allah was the same when I was 14. He was the same when I was 50. He was the same when I was 35. So the reality of it is the Creator is the Creator no matter what. Whether you acknowledge Him or not, He is your Creator. It doesn't matter if you know Him or you don't know Him. If you suffered or you have not suffered. If you're rich or you poor. You're created. And you have a Creator. No matter what name you call Him. And that's where I landed. My salvation, I live to find Allah.
Okay, last question for you. You were on the front lines of the civil rights movement at such a young age. You've seen so much. We're now in the era of Donald Trump. What advice would you give for the movement that's going on now? If you describe it as a movement.
Clarity. You know, people talk about Donald Trump, but now I have clarity as a human being because it was the same paradigm, the same contradiction that you see law enforcement beating citizens of the United States, and then you go to back then in Cicero, the citizen beating your leaders. with no respect, no regard. What Donald Trump has, he just leveled the field. The ugliness is out, it's open. You know what you're dealing with. Before, all this stuff was hidden, misunderstood. A lot of us just tried to intellectualize it off. But hate is hate. Hate is hate. And you cannot underscore what it does to the psyche of our children when no matter what, you're going to be hated. So what Donald Trump did, he lifted the sheet off of everyone. He lifted the sheet off of the haters. You can no longer hide under the sheet with the two eyes sticking out. Now we know the hate is open. So the issue is, what are you going to do about it? And for me, I fall back on my Islam. The most beautiful thing that Allah has given me over these years is trusting Him the most and holding Him first in my heart. And then the power that we have as human beings, because Allah just did not send Islam to Muslims, like the Muslims of China, the Muslims of Pakistan, the Muslims of Algiers, the Muslims of the United States. Allah sent the message to all of humanity. And in that message that Allah sent is He made a deal with mankind. The last two ayahs are Surah Baqarah, and the last two ayahs are Surah Zilzal. In that is the law of the return of deeds. You just can't get angry with man anymore, because whatever your deeds are, you're going to see the consequences of those deeds, whether it's bad or good. And I hold on to that. It gives you patience. It gives you the sabr that you need, because when somebody do you wrong, I can just clearly say, Allah got you.
Thank you for coming to Dallas. It's been my honor to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
I think as we're wrapping up on time, if I could just ask while you're both here, and thank you for being an incredible interviewer. Thank you for being with us, Sister Khadijah. If I could ask you, just as we close up for Isha, and we're going to delay Isha for a few minutes, if you could talk a little bit about how you embraced Islam and what effect that initial meeting with Malcolm had on when you embraced Islam. So you alluded to it many times, but when you actually became Muslim, I think it would be nice for all of us to hear that. You were raised by a Holocaust survivor, a Jewish Holocaust survivor. You had an interaction there, obviously a heavy Christian upbringing, and now you're a Muslim, so you've spanned all three of the Abrahamic faith. So if you could speak about that for just to close us out, inshallah.
I took Shahada when I was a sophomore in college. I first learned about Islam, the version from the Elijah Muhammad movement. I just couldn't get past Yaqub. I was trying to understand it. I was trying to understand it, and I have this honest conversation with people of the movement. I mean, we're in a fellowship now. It's best to be honest. I wasn't getting it, but so I kept thinking it was the problem with the imams. So what we call them the leaders of the different temples. So I would just go from temple to temple, and I couldn't find it. And then one time somebody said, "You know, there's Orthodox Islam." I said, "Orthodox what?" And then they reminded me, remember Malcolm X when he made Hard? So it made me revisit the book. And I got it. And it was an easy decision to make. It was an easy transition. But I'm gonna be honest with you, becoming Muslim, there was no paradigm shift. There was no like, you're Muslim, you're so different. It was too natural. Because if you know Allah in any of the religion, I get what Allah said, the people of the book. If you know Allah, you just know Him. And so it was just it's just that my regiments had to change, but the love, my heart was the same.
Allah bless you. Beautiful way to close out. We're grateful to you, Brother Gromer, again, and we hope that you visit us. You're local to Dallas, so you are welcome to come anytime, inshallah, and visit us more often. Sister Khadijah as well, it's open, inshallah, and I'll let Brother Thomas close us out, inshallah, and then we'll move on to Salat al-Isha. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, and again, I want to say again, I appreciate Gromer for taking this time out to come and visit us and give us this great interview. We just heard and brought out so much from Sister Khadijah. So I can say Takbir, Takbir, Takbir. Yes, Allahu Akbar means God is great. Yep. You remember Muhammad Ali. So, but seriously, I am the Dallas chairman of the National Black United Front. And you know, Malcolm talked about a Black United Front before he passed away. And it was about bringing all African Americans together to fight the common enemy with truth and justice. And so our organization, it's 1981, we were organized across the country to make that happen, to bring African Americans together. But we never forgot our brothers and sisters from other different faiths and other different cultures. It was all about trying to make sure that our people survive America. And of course, you just heard what we have gone through as a people in this country. Now, Sister Khadijah agreed to come and assist us with one of the things that's happening. You heard her talk about Selma, and this is all about Selma and the voting rights struggle and how important electoral politics are. All you got to do is watch Sister Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib in Congress, and you can see what electoral politics can do. What it means is it puts you in a room to make decisions with decision makers. So the room no longer looks like a war room. It looks like a peace room. They're having problems, but eventually they'll get to peace because people are tired of war. But you can only change that by being in a room, being a part of the solutions. And so we have decided that in Selma, there are a number of people who are going to show our film. We did a film on Malcolm X. It's called Malcolm X, An Overwhelming Influence on the Black Power Movement. We've shown the film in many mosques across the country, and including in Dallas here as well. And so, inshallah, we'll probably show it here as well. But the key thing is that we're inviting Muslims from around the country to come to Selma for the annual Selma to Montgomery voting rights struggle. And that, of course, enhances Bloody Sunday. You heard her talk about John Lewis, who is, right now battling cancer. And so a lot of the pioneers are passing us. But it's important that we understand that electoral politics is the best way to change the system in this country and make it equal and comparable for everyone. Thank you, Yanni, for having us here. I appreciate this as a wonderful facility, and I would love to come back again and do a program, inshallah, in the future. I love you. Keep this work up, you young brothers and sisters. Keep this going, because the people in this country, we need you. In fact, the whole world needs you. So thank you all again for coming. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.